You are now entering Derry city limits. Kit and It with George Lea. Hey everybody, welcome to the pilot episode of the new show. Not a lot to say before we start, except the following. Expect spoilers for the Dark Tower series, Desperation, and a little bit of commentary on the Regulators as well as obviously complete, total, in-depth spoilers for It. But hey, if you're listening to this, you already were expecting that. Also, just be aware that George and I had some connection problems when we were recording this, and whilst I've made every effort to synchronise our conversation and edit it as best I can, you will hear some occasions during this conversation where things slip slightly out of sync. We appear to be talking over each other or interrupting each other. That's just an artefact of the issue that we had with the connection. Nonetheless, having listened to it a few times, I think you can quite easily follow the conversation, and I think it's worthwhile to release, which is why I'm doing it. So without further ado, enjoy episode 1 of Kit and It. So welcome to the very first episode ever of Kit and It. This will be an occasional series where I invite guests to come on and discuss Stephen King's It in all its forms, primarily the book, I think, but also we'll be talking about the TV miniseries adaptation and the recent movie, should those things be appropriate. And my first guest on the show, it could only be the incomparable George Lea, who's agreed to come back and talk about it. How you doing, George, this evening?
I'm absolutely fine. Thank you so much, Kit. I was actually thinking when you said there that it's called Kit and It, is the It your guest? Yeah, I kind of like that idea. It's a double whammy, isn't it? You know, it actually works both ways. I really rather like that. I'm very happy to sit and play It for you.
Excellent. Well, it's just my guest shapeshifts into whatever I'm most afraid of each time. So
fabulous!
That's actually
what you most want from a guest. You know, that's fab, isn't it? Pennywise would be great in that regard, wouldn't he? On a podcast or something like that, if he actually became people's fears whilst you were listening, that'd be awesome.
I think podcasts would be where I'd want him. I wouldn't want him any closer than that.
No. Although you would be in a bit of trouble anyway, just being in contact with the creature, wouldn't you? Because it does seem
wouldn't feel safe.
No, it does seem like he can sort of manipulate media and whatnot, and just sort of appear wherever he wants. So really, in any world where there is something like Pennywise, you're a bit screwed.
Yeah. Actually, you make a good point there. It's probably just as well it was written in the pre-internet age. I can't imagine.
Oh, wow. I mean, there's
digital Pennywise. That's terrifying.
Potential there, isn't there?
There certainly
There's
is.
potential for really interesting work, and there's potential for really, really, really bad work. Why am I thinking like there may be some awful like TV miniseries or something that picks that up and runs with it? Oh no.
Well, because there's probably money to be made, so probably. Well, we're going to find out though, aren't we? Because the movie version of It Part 2 will be taking place in the present day.
It will. I mean, that's going to be a really interesting struggle, isn't it? Because they're going to have to take into account developments in technology and in culture and in politics and whatnot that are not present within the book.
Yep.
Which are going to change fundamentally certain aspects of the film. I mean, things like, for example, communication technology.
Yeah.
That's going to actually change certain dynamics within the characters, and the way the story progresses. So, interesting stuff.
Well, I even wonder about something as iconic as the sequence in the book, which obviously is the opening after you've had Georgie's murder. It's the first main section of the book. Is the 6 phone calls.
Yeah. I mean,
even that's going to have a different quality or intonation to it, I'd have thought.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, the TV miniseries actually struggles as well with the adult part of the book, and I think it's an interesting decision to split it up. So you have the retrospectives, the past part first, and then you have the adult stuff after. The miniseries, I would argue, probably falls on its face at that point. That's when it actually stops being as interesting. Whereas the book is a very different animal because it doesn't do it like that, because it sort of interlaces everything together, and you have these wonderful sort of dynamic flashbacks and flash forwards going on all the time, from present day events to events that happened a few decades ago to the point when the main characters are children. It actually adds this really nice flow to things, and I often wonder why adaptations thus far haven't done that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, one of the things that I noticed on the last couple of rereadings of the book is just how much. I mean, the structure is quite remarkable, especially when you consider that, as with most King books of that size, he was making it up as he went along.
Yeah.
You know, like he wrote without planning. So there's that's just kind of astonishing. But the structural thing that really occurred to me the last couple of reads, coming to it, actually, the last couple of times when I've read it, thinking about it as a writer rather than just as a reader, I think that's probably the mental shift I made, was looking at it and saying, there's, it's stories within stories.
Yes, that is
almost all the way through.
That is absolutely it. That is something I took away from my. I mean, I've only read the book twice actually. I read it first when I was very, very young, after watching the original TV show on VHS. It was one of those video rental moments. My mother, my brother, and I gathered around the television, absolutely adoring every second of it. And then me noticing the really, really, really big, heavy hardback that my mom had on her bookshelf that was so big and so heavy, there's actually a dint in the bookshelf where it was weighing it down. And just really wanting to read it and pestering my mom until she let me read it. So coming back to it was really interesting. It was really interesting. I'd forgotten a great deal of the book, I have to say. The TV series was more prominent in my mind than the book, and that's probably because of the age when I read it. It's a very big book. There's lots of information, and I think at that point I was probably just too young for the subject matter to absorb, you know.
Sure.
But rereading it now, like yourself, it's coming at it not only as a reader and as a fan of this stuff, as a lover of this kind of fiction, but as a writer as well. I was absolutely struck by it. I was charmed, for one thing. I was absolutely charmed by it. I think it's much more complex than it's often given credit for. There is a tendency, particularly in academic circles and sort of for slightly more snobbish circles, for King to be disregarded. I think it's spectacularly written. It's for such a huge book, you would expect it to be slightly alienating, wouldn't you? You would expect it to be a bit challenging. You'd expect it to be like, say, The Lord of the Rings or something like that, which is difficult to read. It's not. It really isn't. And I think that comes back to what you were saying earlier. It doesn't scan like this big wodge of text, like this huge, lavish, overly elaborate story. It doesn't scan like that at all because of the way it's broken up. It scans like little stories put together that relate to a wider whole.
Yeah, I think that's a very keen observation. We discussed this briefly on the Hellraiser podcast, I know, but it's I feel like reiterating the anecdote just because it illustrates what you're saying. I remember reading it on the Kindle this time, first time on the Kindle, and that moment when I got to the end of the first part and George's death and you know that wonderful sequence where you follow the paper boat through the sewers, and he describes its journey and the moment where it passes a dead chicken or a drowned chicken and, and then floats out and you know, and he says it leaves Derry city limits and there it leaves our story forever, and that's the end of the chapter. And as I was reading it on the Kindle and I pressed the button to move to the next page, it went from 1 to 2%. And I thought, okay, so I've got 99 more of those stories to come.
Yeah, and in that regard, when you look at it, it doesn't feel challenging, does it? It doesn't feel... It feels... It's one of the things that really did strike me about the book. It is so light and breezy for a book of its kind, and simultaneously has this incredible weight to it, because one thing that both of the adaptations don't necessarily take from the book is its tone. It has this wonderful tonal variation about it, but it's this very grim book. It has a certain like nihilism festering underneath it, which I really appreciate. But the big takeaway for me from this reading, and it's kind of culturally resonant, particularly now, is that the problem isn't Pennywise at all.
Oh, that's interesting.
Pennywise is almost incidental. Doesn't turn up very much, really. You hear about what he's done, or even when he does occur, it's from the perspective of a child that's under duress, and they tend to hear him or smell him. There's some sort of like presence in the air before he physically occurs. And even then, you only get what the child's impression of him is. So whatever he's become, whatever he's shape-shifted into, according to their fears, the character, the entity, doesn't occur very much at all. What you do get a lot of is Derry. You get a lot of the disease of Derry. The fact that this culture and these people have allowed successively for this gradual acceptance of atrocity to the point whereby it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter very much. It's just a thing that happens. It's a thing that happens. And that's where Pennywise has found his niche. That's where he's found his warren. He's protected by that. Were it not for that, he'd have nowhere to go. He'd have no hidey hole. He'd have nothing to shroud him. And the townspeople would have realised that something was happening. They'd have realised some sort of consistency instead of burying their heads in the sand, which is what they do, and just allowing for it. It's a commentary on... It's a very, very dour sort of behind the picket fences commentary, in a sort of Hitchcockian vein, in that what you see, the sort of small-town America, the image of small-town America isn't real. There's a darkness underneath. There is this decay, which is where you find Pennywise. If he is anything, he's like a maggot. He's like a sort of parasite that feeds off of that.
That's a really interesting observation, because I think that one of the things that occurred to me about, as you were talking there, I mean, the thing that I find so fascinating about what you say is I always kind of, in my head, I kind of had it the other way around. Derry's a mean place because of it. But I actually think, as you said that, and I mean, textually, there's obviously the fact that it was there first and whatever, and it attracted people to it. But what I like about what you said is it makes me think about idealism of the 50s is still a really big thing in America. Like the boomer generation is still carrying that nostalgia for the 50s.
Absolutely.
And it actually is a very, amongst other things, is a very nostalgic book. One of the things I loved reading about it is because I read it as a child, and one of the things about reading it as a child was it was a window into a childhood of another time. And the kids resonated very powerfully with me. They felt real to me. But what I like about what you said is what it reminds me of is just thinking, like, the 50s themselves, of course, were haunted, deeply haunted by the spectre of Jim Crow in America and the spectre of racial inequality and the spectre of, I mean, the horrendous things that were happening under the gender roles that were very strongly conforming at the time, and sexuality. And like, if you deviated from the white bread wife and two kids living in the suburbs, job in the city template, that's when you that's when you would effectively, to carry on the metaphor, that's when you would see the face of Pennywise. That's what it is. That's what the book is about. It's what a lot of American horror fiction is about, really, and just a lot of American fiction in general, particularly postmodern fiction. There is this tendency to want to look beyond and to look deeper than general culture wants to or will allow itself to. And King is very good at that, particularly of this era. And what I really love is that the book is about the 1950s, which, I was born in 1984, so it's a semi-mythical time. Absolutely.
It's a semi-mythical time to me. It's a place where movies are set. It's a place where the styles and the fashions and the cultures are kind of mythical, but also very prominent, because they were the 1980s, when the book was written and published. They did experience this cultural fascination with the 1950s, particularly in American cinema and literature. You see it everywhere. You see it in, like, Back to the Future and in Grease and in It. Just as now there is this cultural fascination with the 1980s,
with the 80s,
which is as mythical and as strange to the younger generations now as the 50s was to us. It's a wonderful, bizarre, and slightly... It actually makes all my hackles go up and makes me feel very strange and dislocated.
It was a horrific moment when I sat down to watch it, because I took my stepson to the cinema to watch the latest version, because I wanted to see it on the big screen. I felt it was important. It was by that point it had become a cultural event, I think, legitimately, that film, in terms of box office. And I felt like, I'm a member of the horror community. I want to be a part of this. It is one of my favourite stories of all time. And it was nice to take my stepson who hadn't read the book, hadn't seen the miniseries, knew nothing about it. And for me, it was useful. I was using him as a kind of like control group for my own responses.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult when an adaptation of a work you love comes out, and it's very, very hard to gauge your own reaction to it. I mean, I remember when, for example, the Lord of the Rings films came out. Now, I was up until at that point quite a diehard Tolkienite. I was throughout my youth. I read it so much, and I remember going into those films feeling apprehensive, like feeling nervous and strange and jittery, and the emotions of watching it were really powerful, were really, really strong. They were powerfully positive, thankfully. And I kind of felt a similar thing with it. Not because I don't think I have the attachment to the work that you do, because this is, from what I understand from our previous conversations, for you it is what Weaveworld would be for me if that were filmed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, in the sense that for you, Weaveworld is a ground zero work, right? It redefined what fiction could mean,
absolutely.
And it set you on a path. And I think that is it for me. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to have any even the delusion of objectivity, isn't it? Even the delusion of
absolutely. Well, I mean, as a concrete example of that. So, I took him as my control group, and I was determined when I came out. I knew I was going to write about it for Ginger Nuts, and I was determined when I came out. I am not going to spend the whole review talking about why the film is different from the book. Yes. I'm just not going to do it. It's an adaptation. It needs and of course, I just couldn't do it. No. I spent the entire review talking about, they changed Mike, and this happened, that happened, and it's like I just couldn't do it because the book is there in my brain, like the scale.
Well, about what age did you read it for the first time?
I was 11 years old.
Yeah, so
I was still at primary school.
Fantastic. Yeah. So you read it at the same age that I read Weaveworld. So those exposures are very similar. And at that point, it would have become entrenched in you, in like not just your mind, but your sense of self, in your personality, and it's indelible, isn't it? You cannot escape from it, and you can't you can't identify the thread of influence that very physically shaped your state of mind as a result of reading that book, and take it apart and say, like, well, there it is. There's that thing that flowered from that initial reading, and I can put that apart, and I could say, well, there's that, and here's this adaptation, which is different, Just out of sheer interest, what did you think of the film?
You know what? I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was, I mean, for me, the real thrill was the audience. For me, the real thrill was to be sitting down in the cinema in, 2017, surrounded by teenagers. Yeah. And watching a decently made adaptation of a King story and seeing them all freak the hell out. That was wonderful.
I must say, just as a cinema experience, I probably had the most fun with this film than I've had for a long time. Yeah. With a film that's marketed as a horror film in mainstream cinema, just because there was a buzz. Yeah. There was a real feeling in the cinema, and it's rare. It's rare I've experienced that. And people were enjoying it. They were laughing at all the right moments. They were leaping up and screaming at all the right moments. And there was this wonderful sense of togetherness and of a mutual experience, which I loved. I must say I really, really enjoyed. Now, as a horror film, I would say that it's not trying to be the best horror film ever. I think that's definitely the case. I don't think it's trying to break the boundaries of horror cinema at all. What I do think is that it is trying to evoke a particular kind of horror cinema, which was very prevalent in the 1980s, which is, of course, very deliberate because it's playing it, it's tapping that vein. It knows that the cultural dial at the moment is on that decade. And it's trying to tap that vein in the same way that Stranger Things did, for better or worse.
Well, and in the same way that the novel in the 80s was tapping the 50s. It's the same relationship. and the same
Exactly
gap
that.
in time. Yeah,
Exactly that. That is precisely what it was trying to do, and as a result, it has all of these wonderful these sort of keynotes. Particularly if you're a child of the '80s or a teenager of the '80s, there's a little bit of the Goonies in there. There's a little bit of Poltergeist going on. You know, it's got all of that feeling about it. Even the color palette. One thing I really noticed about the film when I was watching it is the color palette is weird for a horror film. It's really colourful. It's bright.
Yeah,
the colour palette is primarily, I mean, it shifts and changes depending on situation, but it is primarily orange, red, and white. That's the primary colour palette. And I was actually really pleased by that, because one of the things I was thinking about before coming on to the podcast was I was thinking about the film in context with horror cinema of the last couple of decades, and I was thinking to myself, if I see another mainstream horror film at the cinema that has that bloody blue filter over the lens that washes everything in colour, I am going to throw something at the screen, I swear. A can of paint, preferably. You know, something to give it...
Something that'll give it a bit of a lift.
Just anything. I mean, I remember when this trend started. It was sort of like the late 1990s, like the very late 1990s, early 2000s. You started to get horror films that were doing this. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it works. For the right subject matter, it works. That sort of, when there's that blue filter over the lens and it washes everything of colour, so all of the reds and all of the oranges are muted, and you get this almost monochromatic thing going on, and it creates a kind of mood. Fine. Trying to find a work of horror that doesn't do that after the turn of the millennium is almost impossible. Almost impossible, whether the subject matter warrants it or not. And it's frustrating. It just became a trend. It became a thing that horror films did, that identified the film as a horror film. A lot of horror remakes do it, like the Amityville horror remake, like the Omen remake. They all do it, and it's the fact that you know they do it, they do it. You know, you could see the trick. It kind of pulls you out. Whereas I was very happily surprised to see all of this sunshine, to see all of this colour, to see like rubricated skin, and to see like striped red and white shirts, and to see Bev's red hair, and it's all colourful.
But you know what, as well, that's very true to, again, that's true to the spirit of the novel, because one of the things that I noticed on the last couple of the rereads again is the sheer vividness of the descriptions. Especially of the Barrens, you know, this amazing location that the kids spend the summer in. And I felt, I was really pleased. Like you, I was almost overjoyed, actually. My reaction was kind of disproportionate to see the Barrens look as gorgeous as I'd always wanted it to look.
It pretty much looked how I imagined it in the film, I have to say. It really did. It was one of those wonderful moments where, you know how it looks sometimes like when very good adaptations occur and it just chimes and it feels like they've dropped a camera into your head. Yeah. And have filmed your version of that place or of that character. It did that very well. I mean, one of the things I did want to ask you is what did you think in the run-up to the film when you started to see the first pre-release material? What were your feelings?
I tell you what, the thing that really got me was I remember vividly watching the first trailer, and I think it was a shot of the red balloon floating across the library. And I just remember actually getting goosebumps just from that one half-second clip, because what the film did for me really was it embraced, although it was obviously it changed, in some cases changed quite substantially from the plot of the book, it embraced wholeheartedly the iconography of the book.
So totally did, yeah.
Totally. And in doing that, it embraced for me the spirit of the story. So actually, I remember seeing that, and I remember seeing the boat running down the sewer, and just freaking out a little bit, just being like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's, and it obviously it didn't guarantee that the film itself was going to be any
Not
good.
at all. Not at all. I mean, there have been many, many, many fantastic trailers for absolutely abysmal films.
Yeah.
And vice versa, in fact. Vice versa.
Sure. Yeah, they're separate arts, aren't they?
They are. They really are. And the art of making good trailers is, I'm sad to say, almost dead. I feel like an old fart for saying it, but particularly like for horror films. For horror films, you need to maintain some mystery. You need to maintain some ambiguity, but the tendency is for them to show you every key plot point.
Yeah,
every
absolutely.
Key plot point.
Well, you want to. I mean, you want to. One of the most amazing trailers you should check out if you get a chance. I mean, you may already know it, but like the original Alien trailer.
Yeah, that's exactly what leaps to my mind. It is
phenomenal.
Every single time you get this barrage of like imagery. All you get is imagery without context, so you don't know what moments they are, and that escalating whine as things are going to hell. Yeah, it's brilliant. It is a stunning trailer.
It's a masterclass because you watch it, you know nothing about the film except you have to go and see it right now.
You want to know, don't you? It piques curiosity, and also it works for horror because it doesn't cushion it by showing you what's going to happen. It doesn't cushion it by just spoon feeding you all the scary moments, essentially.
Sure.
By contrast, there was. I mean, it's misguided to creators in the first place, but there was recently a trailer for the Slender Man film that's going to be coming out reasonably soon, and it's awful. It's awful because it shows you the film.
Yeah.
All of the key points are in the trailer. You actually don't have to go and see the damn film. Now, the trailer for it got me on board because up until that point, up until I saw the trailer, I was really dubious. I was really dubious. Simply, I think, because of my general cynicism about the state of cinematic horror right now. I know that it's kind of a trendy thing to say, and it's it's almost cliche to discuss it at this point, but the cinematic mainstream horror has been in the toilet for a long time.
Yeah,
it's been really, really bad. When it comes out, it tends to be a remake or a rehash, or it tends to be like a sequel to a film that didn't require a sequel or that doesn't understand the original subject matter. They're not horror films. That's what really bothers me about them. They're not horror films because they're not distressing or scary or upsetting in any particular way because the makers are afraid of upsetting their audience,
I think I would say
trailer.
Sorry, I think I would say no, it's cool. I think I would just say in fairness to the genre you and I both kind of planted our flags in. I think most of what you said actually just applies to cinema in general.
Yes, that is definitely true.
I think
true.
horror's not been immune to the general declining quality of movies in the last
no, definitely not.
20 years.
Definitely not. No, it is. It's symptomatic, isn't it? I think what happens with horror, though, is that it suffers for that.
Sure.
It suffers for not being unexpected and for not being novel. Don't get me wrong, you can tell a fantastic, well-trodden story and do it beautifully.
Sure.
You really can. I mean, you look back at things like, for example, a lot of the BBC adaptations of the M.R. James ghost stories, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Are fabulous.
Yeah, no,
they're just gorgeous, but there's nothing new about them. They are very classic, very well-trodden ghost stories, but they're done so well that they're terrifying. I mean, one of my favourites, Whistle and I'll Come to You, is it does that thing. It does the ultimate cliche. There is a ghost in a sheet in it. There is literally a ghost in a sheet in it, and it should be risible, but it's not. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And this is a black and white production made on a budget of 50 pence and half a curly whirly.
Yep.
Amazing work. And this is something I really took from the It trailer. It actually really excited me to see the film. It got me in. It got me worked up. And as a result, I took my mother to see it.
Right. Oh, lovely.
Because my mum is just. She is the biggest Stephen King fan I've ever met in my life.
Okay.
My mother is just besotted with the guy's writing. She is, honestly. I mean, since I was a child, it's her fault, ladies and gents. It's all her fault. Everything is her
Isn't it?
fault.
It's look. If I've learned nothing from Pink Floyd, it's always Mother's fault, right? It's always...
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, we could go down a very Freudian road here, couldn't we? We really could. Not start to psychoanalyze. Bloody hell, that would be interesting.
No, God, no. Let's not.
Yeah, let's not do that. Let's not open that can of worms.
Stay on target.
God, you read it when you were 11. I read Weeworld when we were 11. It would be just bad.
What were our parents thinking?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I'll be honest. I'm so happy that happened.
Yeah.
That's one of the key things, and I imagine I would hypothesize that the same is true of you with reading it.
Oh, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Absolutely.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't think that the state of my imagination, something I treasure probably most of anything that I consider part of myself, I don't think it would be where it is or what it is without that exposure.
Sure.
And I can't be rid of that. I would never be rid of that, not by choice at all. But yes, I mean, I took my mother to see it because it was really sort of almost close to her birthday. Her birthday's the 16th of October, so sort of around the right era. Yeah. And that helped me a lot. That helped my excitement because she was excited too. Obviously it's new Stephen King adaptation. She's just at the moment she is in Cloud Cuckoo land because all of the stuff, it's become vogue, hasn't it? I mean, Stranger Things. I mean, it's so heavily influenced by Stephen King. You can't shake a cat in a Stranger Things episode for not hitting a Stephen King reference, essentially.
Absolutely.
All of the new Stephen King adaptations that are going to be coming out, or that have come out, you've got Castle Rock coming out very soon, which is either going to be a work of genius, or it's going to be terrible.
Please be good. Please be good. Please be good.
Yeah.
It's going to be like Creepshow 4. Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, I am rooting for Castle Rock. I am rooting for it. I think the concept is genius. I think the concept is brilliant. All it needs is some really good writing, like really good writing. Say again.
And you know what? They've had a good run. Yeah, absolutely. But they've had a good run. I mean, I was just saying they've had a good run. I mean, Gerald's Game I thought was absolutely
You know what? I
superb.
haven't sat down and watched it yet. It's terrible. But I will. I definitely will.
I genuinely think it's worth your time. Yeah. Have you read the book?
Oh my God, yeah. I actually really loved it. It's one of my... I think King's often...
Okay.
He does really quiet stories really well. I mean, it is very different. It's one of those really big basso profundo stories that he does, which are like, it's a big old wedge of book, for one thing. It's a big old wedge of book. And it's all of these very vivid, very elaborate, and very imaginative images, many of which don't make it into either of the adaptations because they're too abstruse, or they're just impossible to film. I mean, there is a scene in the book that for some reason stays with me very vividly, where Mike has his first real encounter with whatever Pennywise is, and it takes the form of a big bird, like a giant.
It's Rodan.
It is Rodan. Yeah, it is it's a type of, it's an adaptation of Rodan that he finds in. It's in like it's nesting, isn't it? In like a
in
pit,
the ironworks.
That's right, in the old ironworks. Yeah, that's right.
In the wreck of the ironworks, where his dad sent him to go and pick up a souvenir.
And it traps him in this half pipe, and he's throwing rocks at it.
It's wonderful.
And how would you ever film that? And make it legitimate. I mean, it works in the book. It actually works really well in the book because you're terrified for him.
It's fantastic.
Because this thing is massive. It's huge, and it's got claws, and it's got like this serrated beak and these oddly mechanical wings that make like a tinny whirring whenever it flaps its wings. And it's the way he describes it strutting around like on top of the pipe and then bending down to peer down at him. It's brilliant. I love it, but I could just see how it would have turned out in the 1990s adaptation. It would have looked like Big Bird.
There's no way to make it work. I mean, the wonderful moment of horror in that is when he climbs up the pipe and he's like, it's way too big, it can't fit in, it can't fit in. And then it does start to squeeze its way in. And he's like, the feathers. I'd forgotten about the feathers.
Yeah,
it's not, and it's just, so good. But in a film, there's nothing there because it blocks out the light. So it's just him chucking rocks in darkness. Like, you can't, I don't know.
It just wouldn't work. Yeah. I mean, if they did the bird, it wouldn't look right. I mean, it would have probably just tonally just wouldn't have fit with a film adaptation. It's too... It would have come off as kind of silly in a film adaptation, I imagine. The effects probably wouldn't have been right, even if it were practical.
But that gets to a key point of the storytelling, though, doesn't it? Because the reason it was scary to Mike was because it was a child's fear.
Exactly.
Right? Rodan he'd seen the movie Rodan, and something of that had stuck in his subconscious. Then when he saw it, because we know it becomes whatever you're most scared of, that's what he was scared of. It is a childish fear. Now, what that means is, to adult eyes, it would have looked comical.
Yes, that's a very fair point, actually.
But because King in the book puts you in the child's perspective and from the child's point of view, you are as scared as the child is because you know the fucking thing is real and is going to try and eat you, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like, it is very... at core, it's a very simple concept, isn't it? It is, what if that thing you imagine under the bed as a kid was real? That's really it, isn't it? What if that fear, when you did look, there actually was something? Yeah. And it actually was dangerous. You know, you couldn't just cover up your head and shiver under the covers and say, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. It doesn't work. Although, there is something about the metaphysics of that because, you know, it isn't, for me anyway, the way I read it, it isn't the fact that Mike chucked rocks at it that hurt it. It's the fact that he was brave.
Yes.
It's the fact that he defied it. He didn't just surrender to it.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't just shiver in fear away from it. He actually fought it.
Well, there's actually a moment with Mike so there's and I actually think it's one of those things. It's not been in any of the adaptations. It's only in the book, but I actually think it's a pivotal moment in the book. And every time it's one of those I kind of forget about because it's a lesser moment. But every time I come to it, I'm reminded again on a reread. Oh yeah. So it's one of the early. There's these occasional chapters called One of the Missing.
Yes.
And you just get to meet one of these kids. You meet one of the kids who's not part of the gang for a while, and then they get eaten. I mean, that's it's like the Rats. It's just one of those like, here, meet a new person. Aren't they interesting? Oh, something horrendous just happened.
Oh, there we go. And they're classic. All sad. All of
them. Oh, they're desperately sad. Oh god, yes.
They're all prime victims. For Pennywise.
That's right.
They've got something very specific they're afraid of.
That's the one.
So it's often a parent.
Yeah, often a parent. So this particular kid has disappeared off. I think this is the one who's. Oh god, yes, this is the one whose little brother's been murdered by the dad.
Yeah, I know exactly the one you mean.
And he ends up by the canal. And he gets eaten by the creature from the Black Lagoon, which comes out of the canal.
It's the creature from the Black Lagoon, yeah.
But Mike goes down there afterwards and finds the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
And he has a moment where the thing comes after him. But the difference between the two kids is the kid who dies, because we have his point of view for that chapter, the kid who dies goes through this whole thing where he's like, it's not real.
Yep.
It's not real. And the fact that he doesn't believe is actually what gets him killed.
Yeah.
Whereas Mike, he believes.
Yeah, he has a moment, doesn't he? He has a moment where he does defy it for a little while, but it's not as long as the other kid, and he just snaps and runs.
And because he believes he runs, and because he runs, he lives. And I think that's really, really interesting, because one of the things that King is wrestling with throughout, I mean, this is something that King wrestles with through all of his work, right? Faith is one of the big things that King is wrestling with all the time.
Yep.
He's a religious man, but he's not, but he doesn't belong to any particular church. He doesn't go to church. But he considers himself to be a Christian. But he's constantly wrestling with the tension between the concept of a loving God and a cruel world.
Absolutely. I mean, you see it in Desperation, quite powerfully.
Oh, I love Desperation. I think it's a deeply underrated work of his. But it's front and center there in Desperation. But to a greater or lesser degree, it's a thread in almost everything he's done, actually. Because it's a source of such rich horror. I mean, it really is. It's a great place to live. But what I love about that moment in it is what he seems to be suggesting is you can't defeat the monster if you don't believe in it. And
actually, you don't see it if you don't. just burying your head isn't going to help. Not
So,
for
like,
this particular monster.
yeah, so you actually have to own the fear and face it for real before you have a chance of defeating it. And I think that's an incredibly difficult, complex message to put in like this schlocky 80s, horror thing.
It kind of is. There are depths, aren't there? And you really have to look underneath to get them, because he doesn't really spell them out very much. He doesn't really explicitly state that, well, this is what's happening and this is how you destroy it, and this is the metaphysics of this universe. There are moments where it does explore that metaphysics. You get in the book, obviously, you get all the stuff about the turtle and about the macroverse and about, which of course makes way more sense when you read The Dark Tower.
Yes.
Way more sense. I mean, there's a creature towards the very, 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 very end of The Dark Tower that's essentially the same species as Pennywise.
Right. That's a fascinating moment. Maybe we'll get back to that. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, there is he's an emotional vampire.
Yes.
But I think, if I remember correctly, it's not fear that he feeds on. It's a sort of diffidence. It's giving up.
Yeah, it's despair.
It's a kind of despair, but also comfort. It's surrendering to comfort. And, it's having ease for the first time, for the first time in days, maybe even months, having comfort, having a fire, having food, that's what he feeds on. But he is very like Pennywise, but not feeding off of children, which is why he's not quite as scary and is more of a kind of fantastical figure.
Yeah.
And not set in a real setting as such. He's set more in a fantastical setting. So the framing of the creature is slightly different, but for all intents and purposes, it does exactly what Pennywise does. Even looks a bit like the creature that Pennywise becomes.
Yeah.
At the end of the book.
Well, let's talk a bit about the creature then, as you brought it up. I mean, one of the things I was struck by in the recent movie, for all that it was obviously much less faithful to the end of the book than the TV movie was, I felt. My personal feeling was that it was true to the spirit.
Oh, absolutely. I think what the new film has done is what good adaptations do, just generally, which is it's taken away and pruned away what does not work in a cinematic adaptation. Instead of trying to film it verbatim, it's taken away what just would not work or would be problematic, would be awkward, and has given you the essence of the thing. And what I really loved about Pennywise, particularly in this film, was his just presence. Yeah. Because he's always there. He sort of pervades every frame of the film. And I'll be honest, when I first saw the images of what Pennywise looked like, I wasn't that thrilled. I wasn't that thrilled simply because I thought they were trying too hard with it. I thought he looked too demonic. I thought it would have been better if he looked just like a clown. Yeah, just a silly, normal clown. Sure. Actually, I was dead wrong. I was dead wrong because that version of Pennywise works in the context of the film so beautifully. Yeah, it really does. They frame him so well from the iconic scene, which everybody remembers, where he's in the drain. Yeah. The image of the clown in the drain is probably the image of it. It's the image that people know, even if they haven't read the book or haven't seen any of the adaptations.
It's the clown in the drain and the paper boat and the balloon. That's the essence. And it's that's the first chapter, isn't it? But that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
It's the most iconic image. But what really, it's something I've noticed again and again, having rewatched it. The clown is never the same. Yeah. He's never the same twice in any particular scene. He's always distorted or transformed somehow. Sometimes he's smaller, sometimes he's more humanoid, sometimes he's more bestial. And I think that lends him this real sense of a reality-distorting entity. And much more so than, say, the version that turns up in the 1990s TV adaptation, which to be fair, they were working with what they had. It's a TV budget, and also within the constraints of technology of the time. But essentially, in the 1990s adaptation, Pennywise is just Tim Curry in a clown suit.
Sure.
That's pretty much it.
I mean, the thing that I find interesting... Go on.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's building on what you've said, really, but one of the things I find interesting about the central dichotomy between both adaptations and the book is what I think both adaptations miss about Pennywise is actually Pennywise is not meant to be scary.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of it having the clown as one of its masters, it's meant to attract children.
Mm-hmm.
The clown is meant to be the honey trap.
Yeah.
Before it assumes a different form, which then spreads the fear, which then allows it to feed. And certainly in the scene with Georgie, that's exactly how it plays out.
Yeah.
Pennywise is the seductor, and yet in both adaptations, he's clearly sinister as fuck from the moment he's on camera.
Yeah. He's. I mean, the 1990s adaptation. I think the best scene actually in the 1990s adaptation is the one where he's in the drain with Georgie. It's raining. It's well shot. It's got a real feeling about it, and because it doesn't really have to do anything overly elaborate, it works very well. It works very well.
And you have to give Curry a huge amount of credit.
Absolutely.
Particularly, I think his vocal performance goes underremarked.
He's the heart and soul of the film. I mean, if you watch it, I loved it as a kid. I loved the TV adaptation as a kid, and I've got a real soft spot in my heart for it, and probably always will, because I did watch it so young.
Sure.
But it's like a lot of Stephen King adaptations from that era, particularly the ones that are made for TV. On any objective level, it ain't that great.
Sure.
It ain't that great. It has a lot of flaws. It has a lot of problems. It certainly isn't scary. It's engaging enough in the first half when it's the kids. All of the kid actors are fine. There's nothing particularly wrong with the kid actors. And Tim Curry is awesome. Mm-hmm. Tim Curry is absolutely wonderful. Mm-hmm. The minute it switches to the second half, it starts to fall apart. Big style.
Yeah.
I don't think the filmmakers necessarily knew what to do with the second half. I think that they were troubled by it. I think there was a lot that they just either couldn't film or couldn't find a way to film, and the dynamic just failed. It starts to fall apart. Also, really bad adult actors. Yeah,
they weren't as good as the kids, were they? That's
Nowhere near. And it's something that does worry me, I'll be honest, with the next film.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard ask, it's a hard sell, because the thing with the parts with the kids, they're so dynamic, and of course you have the built-in factor that they are children. Yeah. And so there's threat. There is immediate threat, and there's theme built in. The fact that this thing is a paranormal or supernatural entity that is targeting children, that is becoming their fears. You have all of this immediate sort of fairy tale resonance going on, this mythological resonance. Works very well. In the adult half of the story, you don't necessarily have that. It becomes more difficult.
Well, also though, let me just chuck something at you, and this is based on my last reread, and I'll be interested in what you think about it, because I understand you've reread it fairly recently as well.
Oh, yes.
I think the adults kind of suck. I think they're the weak link of the book. I think that the adults only really become interesting when they start reverting back into children.
Yep.
When they get together. I mean, Beverly as an adult is interesting, and Richie is great because he's Richie and he's just awesome. But Ben kind of becomes a cipher. Bill kind of always is a cipher. Bill's just a weird character. He's not really a character at all. He's kind of a stand-in for, an ideal, I feel like, almost. Mike's adulthood, of course, is very interesting, but that's because he stayed in Derry.
He stayed in Derry. Yes, he became the guardian of the tomb, didn't he?
Poor sod. I mean, Mike what a shit gig being Mike Hanlon. Honestly,
I know, right? I know, especially when you consider what all the others are doing.
Yeah, and Eddie's an interesting. Yeah, absolutely. They all become very wealthy,
like architects and writers, and and he sits in the same damn town, watching the same shit happen.
In Derry Public Library, writing in his journal until the small hours of the morning.
Until that guy from Sister comes and plays you in a... Oh, man.
Oh, it sucks
Poor
to be
sod,
Mike.
eh?
I mean, Eddie stayed... I think Eddie stays interesting, but that's because Eddie doesn't really grow up. I mean, Eddie stays Eddie, and he marries his mum, and it's really like that's for, so he.
The bits with Eddie I really liked, and I thought that King, because King doesn't really like that stuff. He doesn't often go near the stuff that, say, Clive Barker would, where you've got these odd, slight Freudian sexual resonances. He tends to stay away from that by and large, and he's quite candid about it. I mean, if you read his interviews, he's often asked this, and he says, "Well, I don't think I write it well. I find it, I find it slightly embarrassing, and when I find it slightly embarrassing, it becomes embarrassing writing, so I don't do it." But there is this stuff with Eddie.
Yeah,
he marries his mum. And
yes, he does.
I feel for Eddie probably more than any of them. Because it's, to me, what becomes of Eddie is kind of the ultimate horror in the book.
Yeah.
Especially considering it's all lies.
Yeah.
It's neurosis. His mother, I fucking hate his mother.
Ah, interesting.
I'm sorry for the cursing, but
let's go for it.
Of all the hateful characters in it, and by God, when you get Stephen King's hateful characters, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
He does have this tendency of populating his books with hateful characters primarily, and Derry's chock full of them.
Oh my goodness!
If it's not Bev's dad, it's Henry Bowers and Belch. It's the
chemist. The bloody chemist is
the
a
bloody
nightmare
chemist who goes along with like the lie.
Yeah.
It's awful. I mean, it's awful. But Eddie Kasprak's mother, I think, is evil. I think she's hateful. No, evil is too grandiose.
Yeah.
Evil's way too grandiose. Pennywise is evil. She is pathetic.
Yeah, that's right.
Worse.
Yeah.
That's worse. Because you know what? Eddie isn't pathetic.
No.
Eddie's not pathetic.
Deeply heroic. He is deeply heroic.
But she wants him to be pathetic like her.
Yeah.
She wants him to be controlled, and the only way she knows how to do it is not by love or affection or anything like that. She has to control him by making him afraid.
But I think the incredible thing about Eddie's mum, because you actually get a couple of chapters from her perspective as well, if I remember rightly in the book. Late on, when he gets his arm broken, you get her sending his friends away. They come to visit him in the hospital.
Yeah.
And she's an amazing King character, because I think what's amazing about her is she has no conception of how horrible she is. No idea. Because she makes some...
this is right.
Yeah. Like she says to herself in her own head, I'm not a racist, but I think that, sparrows flock with sparrows and starlings flock with starlings. And in the 50s, that was a mainstream opinion position to have, right?
Absolutely.
No one would ever look at you saying that and go like, well, you're a racist shithead.
No.
That was normality.
Small town America, 1950s.
Yeah.
This is how you would have acted. And she is very, I suppose if you want to over-sympathise her to a certain degree, she is a product of her era and of her culture and of her time. She very much is. In every aspect, like her paranoia is true. She does feel these paranoias. She's not lying to herself. She has become like one of the first victims of media in many respects, which would have been burgeoning at the time. Suddenly, she's aware of stuff like germs and of infections and of pandemics and of bizarre foreign diseases and of how microbes can affect you. And she would have been one of the first people on the ground, one of the first people of her class and generation to have access to that information through television and through libraries and whatnot. So yeah, I can sort of see that. I still hate her.
Yeah, also, just thinking about what you just said there, she's also going to be... The 50s is kind of the birth of advertising, because it's the birth of television. So all of the adverts that play on those fears are going to be targeted straight at her. There's also the fact that she's a single mum in the 50s. That's just a really tough gig.
Yeah, that is an excellent point, actually, and not one I factored into my condemnation of her, and that does soften her to me.
But I think
does soften her too.
But I think the genius of King's writing is that both positions are true. I think Eddie Kaspbrak's mother is a deeply sympathetic character who is also absolutely horrible.
Absolutely vile, yes.
Absolutely vile. And I think that's a testament to some amazing writing.
It's clever, isn't it? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do. It is a very difficult thing to do. And if there was one iota of her where you thought that this was calculated and was not her thinking this is for the best, then she would have fallen apart as a character. And as a result, Eddie would have fallen apart as a character.
That's right.
You know, the basis of that character would have crumbled because he is his mother's Jolum in a way. She kind of creates him. She makes him what he is. But what I love about Eddie, and he's probably one of my favourite characters actually of all of them, is that he does have this core of self. It's there. It's there. It's buried, and it gets more buried when he becomes an adult. You know, under this total avalanche of neurosis. Yeah. But it's there, and he is underneath it. He's a real good guy. Yeah. He's a really cool, pleasant, fun guy. You know.
But the other thing that's interesting for me about Eddie, and we were talking about it earlier, but Eddie is kind of an illustration of this. Eddie's strength and his weakness are the same thing. Because it's his faith in his asthma medicine is what keeps him sick. Mm. But his faith in his asthma medicine is also what turns his asthma medicine into battery acid and attacks the creature.
Yes. Which, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that was in the film adaptation, was it? He didn't use it as the battery acid in the film adaptation.
No. Certainly not in the... I think in the... He might have done in the TV movie, but he certainly didn't in the most recent one.
He does it. He definitely does in the TV movie because there's a really, there's like a kind of icky practical effect that's actually really cool. Yeah. Okay. Where Tim Curry, after he sprays him in the face with it, Tim Curry is sort of like holding his face and screaming, and when he peels it away, there's all this goo and all this sort of like molten clown face coming away.
How young were you exactly when you saw this film?
I wouldn't have been older than 8. Definitely.
Okay then.
I was probably a lot younger.
Right. Well, there you go.
I was probably a lot younger than that.
Anyway.
But by that point, I mean, I'd already seen quite a lot.
No, fair enough.
I was all right. You know, I think it scared my brother more than it did me.
Yeah.
It maybe had it played on my mind for maybe a day or so, and then it went away, you know. And then I just wanted to read the book.
Sure. Yeah, I can well imagine.
That's kind of how it went. Yeah, kind of how it went when I was a kid.
So, as we're talking about the Losers Gang in general, then, what's your? I mean, who's your guy in the Losers Gang or girl? If you had to pick one, who would be your one and why?
Oh, that's a very good question. I like that one. You know what? It's very hard to pick because I like them all, but one of my absolute favourites, one that I actually adore in the book, I really like in the TV adaptation, and I loved in the film. Mm-hmm. I thought her portrayal in the film was great, is Bev. Mm. I really liked her, but she's also one of my only significant bones of contention with the film, which is what they did with her towards the end.
Oh my God. I think we have to talk about that.
I think we've got to talk about that. I mean, in the book and in the TV adaptation, she's the one who really starts taking it to Pennywise. Yep. She's the one who really injures this thing. Yep. And I mean injures it. Where all the others can't, where they're caving in around her, you know, where it's actually playing on their fears and it's winning. It's actually winning. Yep. She's the one who actually hurts it. Yep. She's the one who sends it into sleep. Yep. She's the one who sends it into hibernation for God knows how many years, you know? Yep. She injures it so badly that it has to go into hibernation. It's her that lands that finishing blow. In the film, and it's one of those weird decisions. I'm not entirely sure why they did it. Mm. They make her a kind of damsel in distress archetype. Oh. Yep. And it saps so much from her. Yep.
And she becomes an object to be rescued, which how many times do we have to see the princesses in another castle before we
I was just thinking that exact thing. I mean, okay, maybe it is the fact that kind of storytelling is kind of redolent of the 1980s. Okay, fine. But it just, for me, it saps so much from her. I wanted to see her just hurt this clown.
Yeah, I think the reason it happened in the film, and this is not, this is an attempt at explanation, not an excuse, because I think it's inexcusable. It is like you. It's like, because I really like the 2017 adaptation, but this bit I was so angry.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is it's because of the way they structure the film, and because they introduce something in the film that never happened in the book, which is the gang breaking up.
Yes.
And once the gang breaks up, you do need a compelling reason to bring them back together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know why they did it. I mean, they were trying to introduce tension. That's what it was for. It was, in the last act, you've got to introduce a moment of tension, and then you've got to give them the cipher, the reason to get back together and to go after the clown. Fine. I understand
Boy, did that
you know what?
suck. Why pick that one? Why pick the most cliched hack?
Funnily enough, I was thinking about this on my walk home today, and you know who would have been ideal for the clown to kidnap? Stan.
Yeah.
Stan would have been ideal,
absolutely.
because it would have foreshadowed what happens to Stan later.
It would have set up part two, absolutely.
The fact that he has been in the clown's company longer, that he has seen more of it, kind of explains why he wouldn't want to see it again, why he can't handle seeing it again.
Yeah, and even like exposure to the deadlights, right? You could play on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was particularly annoyed because I felt that the earlier scene with Beverly with the blood in the sink, I actually felt the movie amazingly improved on the book, because they had the sequence where she cut her hair, and then not only did blood come out the sink, hair came out the sink.
Oh, it was gross.
And I thought,
really cool.
How brilliant was that?
Yeah, it was horrible. And it was really good, actually.
It was amazing, and I think it was a physical effect. I think I detected that it was. They used, they used reverse film techniques, so they pulled the hair off.
That is exactly, I think, what it was. That was exactly what it was. It had that, that weird kind of motion, that kind of flailing, skittering motion that reverse film often has, and it does have this very horrible quality. Yeah. This, slightly spidery quality.
Yeah. So I was infuriated that, having actually improved on Beverly's, horror part of the story early on, they so badly screwed the pooch in the final act. I was like, why are you doing this to me?
It was so annoying, because I thought they cast her perfectly. I thought the girl is awesome.
Yeah,
I loved her. I thought the way they emphasised her and enhanced her as a 1980s girl rather than the 1950s one. She's not as demure. She's not as kind of retiring in her waking life. She is quite feisty and quite sort of, oh, screw it, I'll do whatever I like, I'll be one of the boys,
Yeah.
I really liked that. I really loved it, and I loved her dynamic in the group. I thought it was so beautifully portrayed, and then they do that to her.
The weird part is, when you look at what happened in the book, it probably would have worked, because she had the confrontation with her father. Yep. And that played out very similarly. There's no reason they couldn't have run it the same way. Because you're not telling me if Bev turned up in that arcade and said, my dad's after me and so's Henry Bowers and they're trying to kill me, that they wouldn't all just go, okay, let's go.
Okay, fine,
yeah. So
you don't need it, do you? That's the big problem. The kidnapping of Beverly was kind of synthetic. And also, it sort of begs the question, well, if it can do that, why didn't it just do it?
Yeah.
If it can just teleport into their homes, I mean, it could have broken the circle at that point, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Why didn't it just kill her then and there?
Just kill her.
Bam, done.
Yeah, you're done. The end. I mean, okay. I liked the imagery you got through that. I liked the fact that you got the sort of the clown showing its Lovecraftian face.
Yep.
And the deadlights. I liked that. That was kind of cool, and I really liked the sequence when she wakes up. And you actually get to see Pennywise, the dancing clown.
Yes.
Being really bloody weird.
Yes.
Just framed oddly and just really quite distressing. I liked all of that. It's just the fact that it was Bev.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, I even loved the idea of the floating kids, the idea that the clown kidnaps the kids alive and then presumably eats them through its hibernation. I thought
Yeah,
that
I
was
thought that was
great.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too, and it kind of explains the we all float thing, which is never really explained in the book. You
No.
don't actually get that, or it's certainly not in the 1990s TV adaptation. It kind of explains it, and it lends this air of mystery to the clown. You know, what exactly is it doing with the kids? What is that when it's making them float around in that odd sequence?
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. I liked it, and I liked the confrontation that came after. I thought it was well done. I
Yeah.
thought the confrontation with the Losers Club and Pennywise, and the fact that he kind of debates with them, I liked that.
Yeah.
I liked that. He's on the hot foot,
Yeah.
It's sort of like I'll go and have my long sleep, just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Kind of liked that too.
Well, I love the kids discovering that fear was the key. Like, if they weren't scared of it, it couldn't harm them. I mean, that was really powerful, and that's at odds with the mythology of the book. The book doesn't work that way at all. But I liked.
No.
But it's kind of true to the spirit.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to be fair to the filmmakers, there is so much in the book that you just couldn't explain unless there's lots of laborious exposition.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless you had like the characters doing their Council of Elrond thing,
Yes.
where they sit around a table for 35 minutes and discuss like, well, the clown is obviously this, it's from this dimension, and we've got to kill it by doing this, and as long as we're not afraid, and all that nonsense. I thought they did a lot of very, very effective visual and ambient storytelling in the film.
Yeah.
Just letting what didn't need to be expressed or told, just letting it fly.
Yeah.
And I also like some of the stuff they introduced as well, like some of the stuff with Bowers that isn't necessarily in the book, that gives him just a little bit more to work with.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Bowers is an interesting one for me in the film, because my big issue with Bowers in the film is he goes from 0 to 60 early on, and it's not really explained why. I mean, pretty much the second time you see him, he's just decided he's going to carve his name into Ben's stomach, and it's just a bit much. And it wouldn't have taken a lot. You only need 30 seconds of footage to make that make a bit more sense. So that kind of annoyed me.
Show his home life, show a little bit more of his home life, of what's going on and what influences he's having. Yeah, I mean, also, that's you do get it in the book, definitely, but it is kind of a fault of the book as well, because he is. I mean, there is this tendency that it is a thing in King stories, certainly from this era, for there to be the bully character.
Yeah, true.
It turns up quite a lot, and Bowers is the archetype of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think when most people think of the King bully, they probably think of Bowers. And he can be a little bit simplistically horrible sometimes.
I think that's fair. I think for me, the interesting thing about Bowers in the book is how it reveals that he is absolutely a product of his father.
Oh, totally. I mean, he is one of the ruined children of Derry. He is Derry, as hateful as he can be. And he's one of the things I like about the way Bowers is framed in the book is that he goes too far for Belch and the other one.
Yeah. Belch and Chris.
That's it. The other two are hangers-on.
Yes.
They're just normal schoolyard bullies. They're just idiots. They're not that clever. They're not that bright. They're not even that strong. They've just latched onto Bowers because he's forceful.
Yeah.
But Bowers is a genuine psychopath.
Yeah.
He is a product of his upbringing and of his culture. He is a genuine psychopath. And if he takes it into a mind to kill someone, he'll do it.
I mean, for me, the book, it's one of the most chilling sequences in the book, is the sequence where Bowers poisons Mike's dog. And the description of that, it's one of the more painful passages I've ever read. And, I've read it a lot of times. And there's two parts of the book that every time I get to them, I kind of have to mentally gird my loin, steel myself, exactly here we fucking go. And one of them is Patrick Hochstetter's chapter, because he's just, let's hang out with the most vile human being you could possibly imagine, and then watch him die an even viler death. I mean, that's tough. But the other is the death of Mr. Chips, Mike's dog. Because the moment that gets me in that sequence is, so Henry's befriended the dog, he's fed him scraps of meat, and then finally he feeds him this poisoned meat, and he sticks a stake in the ground so the dog can't escape, ties him up, and he watches the dog die. And he's given the dog a nickname. He calls the dog N-word dog, right? That's his name for the dog. And he's watching the dog die. It's taken a long time. The book says it takes the dog several hours to die because the poison's slow working and he's clearly ill. And he actually says, the dog's lying there clearly in pain. And Henry says to the dog, "Do you like your meat N-word dog, how you feeling? And the dog looks at him and weakly wags its tail.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where I just want to burn down the planet. You know, that's that touch of like the dog just being a dog, you know, just responding to a name it's heard with as much affection as it can as it dies, as this. And I just like,
it's the point at which kind of liberal sensibility kind of dies, isn't it? You know, for me, I tend to become a little bit anti myself at that point, you know.
Well, the thing for me is I actually go. What's fascinating, my response is I go beyond hatred. That actually, I look into the pit of despair at that point. I genuinely do. I just think
it's almost nihilism, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's almost
is
nihilism. You're kind of like, you know what? Let Pennywise eat the whole world.
Exactly,
it's fine.
Because
it's fine.
Yeah,
I mean, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. The human characters, the human evil in the book is way stronger than Pennywise's evil.
Yeah,
it's way stronger. Pennywise is a product and a symptom.
Yeah,
he's not the evil itself. He really isn't. In many respects, Pennywise is just a creature that's found a niche, you know? He is acting according to his requirements and his nature. Okay, he's a supernatural, extra-dimensional parasite. Fine. But he wouldn't have a niche. He wouldn't have anywhere to feed were it not for this seething human disease and corruption that is in Derry. And by extension, in any human culture or settlement or collective. And as hateful as Bowers is, and he is totally hateful, as you were saying earlier, he is a product of that.
Well, and the fact is that, you know, he only does that vile thing to please his dad.
Yeah,
and there's that
absolutely, because he's confused. You know, he's conflicted as to what strength is,
and the amazing coda of that,
as to what it means to be a man, of what it means to be human. He's been given a distorted perspective on what that is.
And the appalling coda of that story is when he goes to his dad, tells his dad what he's done, and that's the first time he ever tastes beer, because his dad gives him a beer to celebrate. And it's like, well, what chance did this kid ever have?
Absolutely. I mean, okay. I mean, I take back what I said earlier. You know, Eddie Kasprak's mom is hateful. I really hate her. But Bowers, I think it's because Bowers' dad is on and like as Beverly's dad. You know, they're on another plane of hatefulness.
But
they are.
Yeah, go on.
They're not. They are actually almost inhuman hatefulness, because you can't get a grasp on it. You can't get a bead on it. I mean, Kasprak's mum's particular kind of evil, I can understand it.
Yeah,
there's a reason for it. There's
you can see how she got where she did, right? You can see how that personality evolved from the life circumstances she faced. Yeah,
but those two, Bev's dad and Eddie's dad, they are the kinds of characters, and they're not just the kinds of characters; they're the kinds of people. Because as broadly drawn as they are, these people do exist. They're the kinds of people that make me feel genocidal. You know?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, part of you thinks is the species really worth it if we occasionally throw up things like this? Is the whole experiment worth it? Yeah, no, I understand.
It really is quite insanely powerful, the emotions, more so than Pennywise ever does, because Pennywise, as I say, its evil is inhuman and supernatural, and therefore it's beyond real logic. You know, you can't actually say you hate Pennywise.
But also,
you can be afraid
Pennywise is also true to its own nature. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You feel that whatever Pennywise is, and it's never fully explained, but whatever Pennywise is clearly hardwired, right? Pennywise didn't choose to become what it is.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, it needs this to survive.
Yeah.
As horrible as that is.
Yeah.
You know, and don't get me wrong, it is a force of metaphysical evil. But no, it did not choose to be it.
No.
It is what it is, and it's doing what it does to survive. It's an alien, you know. It is effectively an alien, isn't it? You know, it's an extra-dimensional alien. So, what can you do?
Let's talk about that a bit, because one of the things that occurs to me, you said earlier, you were talking about the adaptations and how neither of them really tackled the fact of, or the discussion of its origins. And one of the things that, I mean, the reason I think that is because you could never, I don't think you could ever get away with filming the smoke hole sequence.
How would you even do it?
Well, there's two
mean,
things. There's the technical challenge, but I think also genuinely there's the imitatable behavior problem.
Yes, there's that too.
I just don't see how you get it in a movie. I just don't see how you get it past the censors.
They would have to do it in another way, wouldn't they? They would have to have some like communal dreaming kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Some psychic episode. But even then it would be difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult to justify. And also, that kind of imagery. And King does it really well, you know. I really like it when King, in his books, goes slightly surreal.
Yes.
And metaphysical. He's actually really good at it. When he goes slightly Barker.
Yes.
You know, he's actually really good at it, and he talks about it on, I think it's in On Writing or one of the interview books that he's done. He talks about this stuff, and he says that he doesn't do it very often because he finds it difficult, you know? I think he's really good.
Oh,
I think he's really good at that kind of imagery. I think he's got the imagination for it. He's got the breadth of imagination for it. You see it in books like Bleak House and in The Regulators, a little bit in Desperation. You see it in The Talisman. You see it in The Dark Tower. You see a little bit of it in The Mist, where he lets it go a little bit, you know? It's not domestic horror anymore. It's kind of Lovecraftian. It's kind of cosmic horror.
Have you read the short story 1407, I think, about the hotel
14,
room?
I have read 1407.
That's the one for me. That,
Yeah.
I think, is one of his finest short stories.
I
And
loved it.
every time I read that, I find myself, my right brain just slips a gear. How did you do that? How did you turn a hotel room into that?
Yeah. Yeah, the imagery
astonishing.
is fantastic, isn't it? The imagery is so good. And it is slightly intimidating. I mean, it's the kind of thing where you read it and it's sort of like, oh, fuck you, Stephen, fuck you. You know? it's
Stop showing off, you bastard.
Yeah, you arse. Yeah, it is that kind of thing. But it has it too. I mean, and it is kind of like a formative book in that regard because it was one of his more or less earlier ones, you know. And it is the same metaphysics that you find in The Dark Tower. It's exactly the same metaphysics. But how would you even realize that imagery in filmic or visual terms and make it work? Because it is so abstract. It's so sort of LSD acid trip weird. You know, it's Pink Floyd on in the background, bizarre.
Yeah. Well, it's the same central problem you've got with the deadlights, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's primarily exists conceptually.
Yes, yeah, and it's something that film struggles with. Film and TV struggle with when you've got these books that have a very literary quality to them, in the sense that they are literate. They know, they utilize certain concepts that exist within mythology, within metaphysics, that are established within culture. Yeah. They're enshrined to such a degree that you don't need to describe them. You reference something, and then people know what you're talking about. The deadlights, you know what they are, even though he doesn't really describe them. You kind of get an idea of what the deadlights are. But how do you show that in like a physical sense?
Well, it's the dark light that exists between universes. What's so hard about that?
Yeah, what's so hard about that?
Point a camera at that.
I genuinely believe this is why, despite it being so visual and so florid and so open to adaptation, why there are so few direct adaptations of Lovecraft.
Yes.
I think that's primarily why, because the stuff that he describes, it is sometimes a bit like going mad.
Yeah.
Trying to visualize it is a little bit like going mad, because it's so elaborate, it's so over the top, and again, it is designed so you don't.
Well, and funny enough, King talks about this, and I can't remember if it's On Writing or Dance Macabre, but he talks about part of the reason Lovecraft is so brilliant and plays on your fears so expertly is because he doesn't actually describe. You get senses of what's going on, you get glimpses. But the idea with Lovecraft is always that fundamentally what the character is seeing is indescribable.
Yeah.
And that very indescribability is what creates the horror.
Absolutely. It's this notion that there are forbidden things, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are images and entities that if you just saw them, if you attempted to think about them, they would drive you mad.
Right.
And you can't visualize that. You can't visualize that because to visualize it would be to contain it. It would be to curtail it. And that's a problem. That's actually a problem for horror in general. Yeah. And for any kind of fiction or material that's trying to create these vast metaphysical images. If you try to contain it within an image, within a visual image, you limit it immediately.
Right. Well, I mean, and the moment I'm thinking of particularly in It is where Bill's heading towards the deadlights and he looks into them and he describes how there's a space within them where you might find a triangle with 4 sides.
Yeah,
or one with 6.
That's the kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's
that's the good stuff.
And again, it's like, film that, you know.
It's brilliant.
Film a triangle with 4 sides, you know, like you can't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go and do it. You know, there is a truly terrible adaptation of one of Lovecraft's stories that was made for like the Masters of Horror series from yonks ago from the 1990s, and it's Dreams in the Witch House, I think, is the adaptation. And it's awful because it tries to visualize. You know how Lovecraft occasionally had these sort of these really bizarre flights of metaphysical fantasy, where you'd have these flights through states of being where there are alien geometries that have too many sides and planes and dimensions for human beings to even perceive. It tries to show you that,
right?
And it's like, just give up. Don't even try.
Well, it's like
don't even try.
Yeah, I always think of like the opening credits of the like 50s or 60s Twilight Zone. You know, it's like
yes,
fundamental.
Or Garth Marenghi's Dark.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we've never moved beyond that as an attempt at representation on film of this. Like, why are you bothering trying to do this? This isn't what film does.
This isn't technological. You know, this isn't a technological problem either.
No.
It's not a limit of technology. It is actually impossible to portray these things.
It's a category error.
It is. It's a category error. Works in literature.
Yes.
Works in literature does not work.
Does not translate.
So, which is, you know, the film adaptation and actually the 1990s adaptation, they do deftly sidestep it. I think quite cleverly. I like the fact that in the 1990s that they just go for simplicity. It's just this very pale light.
Yeah.
That I kind of like that, and it tends to fade out whenever the deadlights occur. You get a shot of like the characters looking into it and their hair blowing and sort of like this odd noise, and then it cuts. So you don't see what they see. You don't perceive what they perceive. And in the film adaptation, of course, it actually more or less does away with the notion of the deadlights. It doesn't mention them. It just shows you what they might be. Yeah,
it hints at it, doesn't it? I mean, for me, the only real kind of moment in the film where I thought, okay, here we go, is when, you know, it opens its mouth impossibly wide, and you see all those teeth, and then there's a light within the throat.
Yeah, there's like a light in the throat, and then there's like nuclei.
Yeah,
there's like little, almost like pollen. It's really strange, floating around and sort of in like a molecular dance. It's really cool. I actually really loved that imagery. I thought that was very, very clever, and I liked that it went to the Lovecraftian extreme of things.
Yeah, I thought. I do, and I thought that'll do. If you're going to try and do this on film, that's how you're going to try and do it. Just do it by inference and let us do the rest.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that occurs quite a lot, actually, in reviews of it, both the book and the 1990s adaptation, but the end. So what Pennywise becomes at the end of the book and at the end of the 1990s adaptation. Now, in the 1990s adaptation, I think we can all agree that it was not successful in the 1990s adaptation.
I think the kindest thing you can say is that it was as faithful as the technology and budget would allow to the book.
Yep, that's fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. I mean,
but that's where my generosity ends.
That's where my generosity ends too. The minute it becomes a Muppet, that's the end for me.
It's not good.
It's not frightening. It's not frightening. It's a Muppet.
Yeah.
It looks like that gremlin that drinks the spider formula in Gremlins 2.
Okay, but is that a problem with the film, or is it a problem with the source material? because
that may be a problem with the source material, because you know what? I remember distinctly as a kid thinking, I didn't like the ending of the TV adaptation. I wonder if it's different in the book.
Right.
And it wasn't. It's actually pretty much the same.
Yep.
I'm not fond of the big spider.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not fond of the big spider. I do wish that it was more abstract than that. You know what I mean? I do wish it was more abstract than that. I understand it. I kind of get why he went there, because you do want a payoff. You know, you want to see what's behind this creature and what's behind the deadlights, assuming that the spider is behind the deadlights, of course, and it's not just another projection, which it might be.
Well, I mean, I think the book's pretty clear about that. The book says this isn't what it really looks like, but this is the nearest the human mind can conceive to its
in fact, doesn't he say that to
I think
them?
pretty much, yeah. I think that's
he says that
that's
to
close
them,
to a verbatim quote. Yeah.
He says something like, you will not see me again. You'll see only what your pitiful little minds will allow.
And also, I mean, in the book,
which is fair
in
enough.
The book, what it makes it clear is what it really is the deadlights themselves. That's the essence.
Yes, it's the light, isn't it? That's actually the creature.
But it's like, because it has a physical form, it has, and actually, that's the thing about the book, isn't it? It talks about how like its strength is also its weakness, because it can take the physical form of whatever it is you're scared of, but to obey the rules of that form.
Yep.
Which is why the fact that it becomes the werewolf in Nebot Street is so important, because it's a werewolf, Silver can harm it.
Silver hurts it, yeah.
Because it's bound by the rules.
Yeah, it is in that regard. Again, it's a part of its metaphysics, isn't it? The fact that it is kind of a fairy tale demon. It's a boggart, you know, it's a changeling.
Yeah.
And therefore he's bound by mythology, by the rules of storytelling and mythology and imagination. I actually really like that.
But what about the moment in the book, which again I don't think is in either adaptation, where they realise that it is not just it, but it is both female and pregnant?
Yes, and pregnant. Yeah, that's very peculiar. I mean, that's just a bit of very deft storytelling in King's part, because that lays the seed, doesn't it? You know, that basically says, well, maybe it's laid eggs elsewhere. So if I wanted to do a sequel or a spin-off, I could. I mean, it's been there for a long time too, so you can safely assume that it may be laid eggs somewhere.
Yeah.
And that there are other Pennywise-like entities out there.
Absolutely. Well,
which is kind of cool.
But I also love the idea of how it suddenly pushes the stakes in that final act through to the stratosphere, because it happens. Yeah, it's the adults who realise, and I mean, I think the kids realise it's female, but the adults realise it's pregnant. And what it suddenly means or it certainly meant to me as an 11-year-old from a reader point of view, I immediately kind of clocked to the fact of like, oh shit. If it's laying 1,000 eggs, that's beyond the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's very clever, because in that last moment it ups the stakes enormously.
Yeah.
It takes it from being the more personal, almost fairy tale horror that it has been up until that point, to being a worldwide one, to being like a cosmic horror. This thing could potentially eat the world.
Yeah.
And doesn't it even describe itself at one point as the eater of worlds and of children?
I can't remember. It's possible. Yeah,
I believe it does. It's when it grabs Stan in the sewers during their confrontation, their original confrontation with it. It describes itself as the eater of worlds and of children. So
it certainly sounds like it to me.
You can sort of like infer from that maybe there have been other states of being and other realms and realities that it's devoured entirely, and it's sort of moved on to this one.
Yeah.
Which again is kind of Lovecraftian.
And yet with King you've got the counterbalance of the force of good, unlike in Lovecraft. So
in Lovecraft, there's hope.
King will chuck you a turtle.
Yeah, at least. And the power of humanity, you know, there is some hope for the human spirit in Stephen King. There is not in Lovecraft, I can tell you that.
No, that's true.
Definitely is not. No,
well, that's
God Almighty.
I mean, that's the dividing line, I think, between King and his pen name Batchman. I think when King writes as Batchman, then all bets are off, right?
Yeah.
I think the
Oh
Bachelor.
yeah, he lets Bachman go, doesn't he?
I think Bachman is king without faith. I really do.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and you see it so clearly in the divide between Desperation and the Regulators.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're the same subject matter, essentially the same subject matter, but written from two different precepts.
Yeah.
The Regulators is more surreal, it's more nihilistic, it's more violent and gruesome. Innocence dies in the Regulators, and it's a horrible book. It's really good. I think really good.
Yeah, I
love the Regulators, and I think as I've gotten older, I've started to prefer the Regulators. So I don't know what that says about.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what that says. It's kind of despairing in and of itself, isn't it? But whereas Desperation, of course, has hope. It has a lot of hope in it. As vile as that book gets, and bloody hell.
Yeah.
I
mean, the scenario that kid goes through across those 700 pages is
Jesus Christ. I mean, I read that as a kid too.
Yeah.
I read it on holiday because I ran out of the books that I took, and Mum had taken that, and she said, "Here, read that."
But interestingly, the central premise of both of those, and to a degree, it's kind of implicit in it as well, is the idea that God is cruel.
Yep.
Because the only other thing I really wanted to get into with you about the book, and again, it's a difference between the book and both the adaptations, especially the new one, or less so the 96 one, is the aspect of fatalism.
Yeah, which is... It's fascinating, but it's like what you were saying earlier, but there is a thread of that running throughout Stephen King. There really is. There is this notion of characters having predestinies, I suppose, but at the same time, those predestinies are mutable. They seem to be predestinies that they can choose to accept or that they can fight against. You see it writ large in the metaphysics of the Dark Tower, which is related directly to the metaphysics of it.
Yeah.
There's the notion, what do they call fate in the Dark Tower? It's called Ka, that's right, Ka. And it's not a good force or a negative force, it just is.
Yes.
It's just something that is.
Well, it's
and it's something that it's something that Roland uses as his give all excuse, isn't it? He just shrugs and says Ka.
Yeah.
It happens. It's like saying shit happens, isn't it, essentially?
Yeah. Well, and the response he gets from his wise ass sidekick often is Kaka, which I absolutely love.
Kaka.
Because that's me in that situation. That's my response. Like, yeah, really, Car? Yeah. You know what I say to that?
Absolutely. But it is strong in it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you do get this sense in the book, certainly, that these kids, there is some force behind them that marks them out, that brings them together, and it's something about that unites them. Okay, you've got the turtle acting on them, which is this odd. It's one of the guardians of the beams, if you know the mythology of the Dark Tower out there, ladies and gents. It's one of the guardians of the beams. It's like one of the most positive forces in all of creation, essentially, protecting one of the beams of the Dark Tower that holds up all of reality, which presumably Pennywise is one of the many chaotic forces trying to bring down.
Yeah. But also, don't you love the mythology in it specifically posits that the turtle created the universe by vomiting it up.
By vomiting it up, which is such a... It's such a classically sort of mythological thing, though. It's kind of like it's got this sort of air of ancient Egyptian mythology about it. There are lots of these stories in very sort of ancient cultures of the universe being created by cows shatting it out, or by great cosmic cows shatting out the universe.
The dung beetle pushing the sun across the sky, right?
Pushing the sun across, absolutely, absolutely, attributing like very profound metaphysical things to very mundane animalistic totems. I think that's really cool. So the turtle and Gan, or God, are kind of synonymous in this instance. And maybe that's the case for the universe in which this particular Earth resides. Because, there are multiple universes.
Yeah, the King
because,
multiverse.
Of course, there are... the King multiverse, which is effectively infinite. Over which Gan presides, which is kind of God, but kind of not.
But there's also that slightly disturbing moment then, because they encounter the turtle twice in it as children as adults. So both times it's when they're engaged in the ritual of Chud, which again completely unfilmable. But
totally. I mean, how would you? I mean, even the name.
Yeah. Yeah,
people would laugh.
I've just guessed. I don't even know if Chud's right. It might be chewed because it's got amulets, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? Either way. I think either way people would have laughed.
Exactly. The what now?
The what?
But there's the moment when adult Bill is being, sent hurtling towards the deadlights, and he passes the shell of the turtle, and the turtle doesn't talk to him the second time, and it actually says he's dead. He vomited up a universe inside the shell and choked on it.
Wow.
And it's like,
that's very cool.
It's like, King, were you having a bad day when you wrote this?
That's a kind of nihilistic
really
concept,
dark,
isn't it? I mean, so that's effectively that God killed itself by accident, choked to death on its own creation. That's dark.
And the constant refrain, of course, throughout the book is the turtle couldn't help us. Like the turtle couldn't help us, and it's this force for good, and it's benevolent and it's kind, but it doesn't impact.
No, and I really rather like that.
Yeah, I do.
I love that because it gives the kids all responsibility.
Yeah,
it lays it firmly in their laps. It's in the lap of humanity. There is not going to be some Deus Ex Machina where the turtle descends on a beam of light and just evaporates Pennywise in their hour of need. It's not going to work like that. They've got to find their inner strength. They've got to do it themselves.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, it speaks to again that thing, because the central phrase in Desperation is "God is cruel."
God is cruel, yeah. And bloody hell, he's very cruel in that book.
But it feeds into that theme for me because again, as with Desperation in it, everything you described just then, I mean, that's true. That's part of the story. But then you have to deal with the cruelty of a creature of infinite power that pushes kids into that situation, and then just says,
absolutely, that allows for it in the first place.
That allows for it in the first place, but also that demands that kids be its avatar and its warriors in this plane, and then just says, oh, by the way, good luck. I'm not actually going to help you.
It's a classic. You know what? That is a classic archetype, not in horror fiction necessarily, but in fantasy fiction. You find those characters all the time. Aslan is that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Effectively God, but plucks children from an alien universe to fight his battles for him. Gandalf is that character in The Lord of the Rings. He's effectively a demigod, but plucks up this little innocent hobbit to do his work for him, his dirty work. The Doctor in Doctor Who is that. Very much that archetype. And you find them throughout. They're these avuncular sort of guide characters that are often portrayed as being very wise and as being they're often portrayed as good guys, when in fact, when you look at it objectively, they're the most malevolent characters in the story.
Yeah. I mean,
in any objective sense.
Certainly.
They're the most malevolent characters in the story.
I mean, I was going to mention the Bible, but maybe I don't need to do that.
Yeah, I don't think you need to. I think the implication is plain.
But I find it fascinating. The thing that I find fascinating about that, and I think it's one of the reasons that King is one of my artists, and why I return to him over and over again, and why I read all of his new work and I reread his old work again and again, is because King's a believer, I'm not. But actually, our opinions on God are really very, very close, because to quote my sadly now passed grandma, if God exists, he's a sadist. That's basically my position. Well, King's position is God is cruel. Those aren't identical positions, but they're compatible.
But they are related, aren't
absolutely. And
they're very much related. But what I do like about that, I mean, King's conception of God I find to be very complicated. I think it's much more interesting than most conceptions of God, to be honest. I think it's very interesting. It's not, although it has Christian overtones, it is not specifically or exclusively Christian. I'd say it's more almost like deistic than anything. It's almost like this unknowable force, and it's almost impossible to discern what its intentions are, or to predict what it wants or whether it's going to intervene or not. And it's not the kind of force that will help just because you believe in it.
Yeah.
Or just because you have faith in it. It is, in fact, quite likely just to leave you to get on with it.
Well, in that sense, it's a very Catholic God, right? It's a very much kind of
It's
faith alone is not going to
Catholic,
get you anywhere. You need, let's see some good deeds now. Yeah.
Yeah. You go and do it. I mean, the kid in desperation is the one I always think of.
Yeah.
Who is quite faithful all the way through.
Yes.
But goes through some of the worst experiences imaginable.
Yeah.
Some of the worst things. He sees some of the worst things. I mean, I always think of the end when Tak has possessed the corpse of his mother.
Oh.
And his mother is kind of decomposing. He doesn't ever see it.
Yeah.
But she's there.
Yeah.
He hears her.
Yeah.
It's horrendous.
And his father dies right in front of him, having already lost his sister and his mother. His father then is killed right in front of him in the climactic.
It's horrendous.
I mean,
the whole book is horrendous.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. The imagery. I love Tak.
Yes.
I love Tak.
No, Tak's one of the great. And again, actually, there's some. I think there's some Barker-esque qualities to that tale.
Oh God, the way he decomposes.
Both with Tak, but also with the other thing I was thinking of, particularly with the kind of, I can't remember what the name of them is, but you know, the totem items that they find.
Oh, the cantois.
The cantois,
yeah.
That feels very Barkerish to me, you know.
Yeah, very much so. I love the fact that he doesn't really ever explain what they are, the cantois. They just have this influence upon people. Yeah. And they turn people... They sort of emphasize the most bestial and negative aspects of people's personalities, don't they?
Yeah.
And again, you don't really find out what Tak is.
But you
don't find out where it comes from or anything like that.
What's interesting about that for me is that steps to me into King's conception of evil, because I think that obviously the influence of King's religion in terms of the fact that he believes in a god is an obvious influence, but also I think the interesting influence is that King also clearly does believe in evil with a capital E.
Yeah, as in like an entity or a force,
like a malevolent power that preys on people as much as the benevolent power of God acts on people or helps people to act themselves. And I think that really does inform his work. And you know, like as you were describing the Cantois, then I was thinking like that's it as well. That's the creature that lives under Derry, infecting this entire small, large town / small city with its.
It does come up, doesn't it? It does come up again and again and again and again in King's fiction, actually. The notion that there are objects or items or entities that can have an effect on people's psyches, either collectively or individually. Yeah. And that emphasizes the negative aspect somehow. That sort of like acts as a... I don't know, some sort of receiver that resonates the evil, resonates the negativity, and then blasts it back at you.
Well, the other,
in stereo.
I mean, the other obvious twin for me to the story of it is Needful Things.
Ah, Leland Gaunt. Yeah.
Well, there's Leland Gaunt himself, obviously, who is an it type character in the sense of that malevolence, but also the objects that he sells.
Yeah. It's quite odd, isn't it? Because it's something that you see from King's. It is obviously from his derived to some degree from his Catholicism or his lapsed Catholicism, but it's also from his reading as well.
Yes.
Because he was a massive Lord of the Rings fan when he was a kid. And still is, and you can see it's very like the One Ring, isn't it? It's that notion that there can be items, that there are physical things that are items of malevolence that actually resonate and emphasize malevolence. I really like that concept. I really do. Yeah,
and I think that the idea of it, the creature, being managing to do that to an entire town, becoming, because the other thing that all this, it's one of those things we haven't, as you've been talking about, it's kept occurring to me again and again, is how he describes Derry. I think it's Mike Hanlon who describes it as having a quiet kind of prosperity, and there's very much an implication that the town itself has made some kind of conscious or subconscious deal with this devil that exists in its sewers, and that in exchange for the occasional eating of children, it will have this quiet life.
Yeah, so it's almost sacrificial it's almost like it's a cult in a way. It's like an unspoken cult. Will allow it to slide.
And it also means that the creature changes to becoming a symbiotic parasite rather than an outright destructive one.
Ooh, actually that's a layer of it that's actually really distressing, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
It's really distressing. And again, it does have certain resonance now, because there is that culturally there is that massive tension between the old and the young obviously in US culture, but very much in UK culture too. And I think it's certainly in Western culture generally, there are these tensions between the old and the young, where there is a feeling that older generations are selling us down the river, are willing to sacrifice us. I say us. And it's there. I think that may be why it has become so resonant again. And this is, and the fact that it is undeniable. I can't believe how well it did.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's incredible.
I am flabbergasted. Even though I enjoyed the film, I enjoyed it very much. I thought it was a great film. I cannot believe it did as well as it did. I'm very happy that it did. Because even if you didn't enjoy the film, it's opened the floodgates.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled. And it's, King's, he turned 70 last year. And I hope he lives to be 130. I hope he writes every single day while he's doing it. But it must have been a thrill for him. It must have felt like a lovely kind of affirmation for him, and he, well deserved.
To think that the story survived. It survived that so long and still has enough power to excite people. People are still interested in this thing. There's life in it. There's so much life in it still. My only hope is that it's capitalized on, and I don't just mean the sequel. I mean, the sequel is going to be tricky, and I have all my hope, prayers, everything crossed, basically, everything crossed. I hope it does well. I hope it's a good product.
Very best of luck, guys.
Oh my God, yeah, you've got a hard job. You've basically put your head on the block with this one, but
and I'm sorry, but you've done the easy bit. You really have, because the kids are the core of the story, and they're the charming part of the story. The adults suck. Good luck.
The very best to you. Yeah. But I hope other things happen too. I hope that this opens the floodgates. I hope we start seeing producers and studios looking to further afield, not just at other King works to adapt, but looking at other writers from that era to adapt. Oh, what about some of Barker's stuff that's never been adapted?
Can you imagine a high rent like Netflix or Amazon Prime Weave World? Or Imagica? Can you imagine what they could do?
If it happens, if they get, if that particular movie magic happens, where it's the whole Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings thing, where you just get everything happens right. Yeah. Just everything happens right. You get the right budget, you get the right studio, the right setting, the right director, the right people involved, and somehow some cinematic magic, some miracle happens, and you get the perfect adaptation. It could be something we've never seen before.
Yeah.
It potentially could be something that's never been done before, never been seen before, that could raise the standard, it could raise the bar. It really could, but it relies upon those factors. So.
The thing for me is like the epic scale of Barker's work means it lends itself more naturally to the 10-episode series than it does a movie, actually, especially the length of the works. And I
totally agree.
I love the idea of the one I always think of is Carnival, where you look at it and go Carnival, and you think that shows you that that points the way, because that's Barker-esque in a lot of ways.
It's very Barker-esque, yeah.
And you think this could happen. This could be ddone.
There's potential. Yeah. There's potential, and I think we're in an era in terms of television where it's even likely. Because, venues like Netflix, they are looking for this stuff.
They're desperate for properties,
They're desperate for properties, and there's a massive untapped just wealth of it there that's never been done before. The fact that, I mean, you know, you had American Gods from Neil Gaiman, which I really enjoyed. It's just sad that it's never going to be there's never going to be a decent follow-up. From what I understand, and from what I've heard rumblings that there have been talks of a Weave World TV series, but it's I mean, it even a long time ago it even started production. There was going to be a BBC series in the 1990s, didn't happen.
It's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, I would love to have seen that, but I think at the same time, I think you need that Netflix budget.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the technology, of course. I mean, the stuff in Weave World that I still don't know how you'd do it.
No.
Convincingly.
No, and it's the same. Yeah, and I mean, I think Great and Secret Show's the other one that I would.
Oh, God.
I would love to see it.
I would kill. There are things I would be willing to sacrifice to see that. You know, I don't know if I'd go so far as a human infant. We'd have to see. But my God, I think it would be more forgiving than Weave World.
Yeah.
Because you can suggest more in the Great and Secret Show than you can in Weave World. But it's still bloody hard.
It would be a job of work. Cycling back to it briefly, I feel like we're wrapping up here, by the way.
Yes,
no, it's fine. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed the conversation. One thing that you said, though, did trigger something in my mind. You talked about how, you know, this story has become relevant again. It's become big again at a time when there's a bigger cultural divide between, you know, generations than there has been in a long time. It occurs to me as you say that generational gap appears to be happening in a 30-year cycle, which is quite scary, because that's obviously the same cycle that it itself functions on. Because, of course...
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
You've got the counterculture of the 60s, you've got the yuppie revolution of the 80s, and now you've got the millennials versus the boomers.
Yes, the millennials and the boomers, yeah. It's slightly weird, isn't it? It's almost like... You could almost think that King has tapped into, consciously or otherwise, these cycles and has kind of expressed them somehow. Or you could look at it as culture being a dynamic beastie, like almost like a living entity and responding. It's actually acknowledging these cycles of itself somehow. It's quite beautiful to think about, and it's almost too big to grasp. It's the machinery of history and of culture grinding round once again, and it's almost too big to conceive of. But brilliant to think about.
Yeah, but there's also the notion for me, and I've been thinking about this in relation to the Dead Zone, which obviously predicted Trump in some ways, and also... What's the other thing it reminded me of in relation to? I can't remember. But the idea that it's gone. See, the memory, it fades.
Well, you know, it's kind of late.
Star Wars is the other one it reminds me of.
Star Wars, right.
So it's the new trilogy, the idea that the evil keeps reoccurring. And it's up to each new generation of kids to fight it. You know?
Yeah, so there is no happy ending. Yeah, there is no. You can't just destroy the Death Star and kill the Emperor. And then
there's no happy. That is it. Because that was my big emotional reaction to The Force Awakens. I went to see it at the cinema. I really enjoyed it, but I came out the cinema the first time genuinely upset. Yeah, like emotionally up. I mean, distraught's a strong word, but you know, like, you know, not happy, miserable, sad.
It's that notion that the sacrifices of the original films don't mean much. They don't mean as much because it hasn't worked.
Well, yeah, and fundamentally it's the notion that each generation has to fight fascism all over again, you know, like the Nazis keep coming back, the monsters keep coming back.
But it may, as unpleasant as it may be true.
Yeah.
It may be true, because what we may have hit there is something fundamental to humanity.
Yeah.
Which isn't inalienable as such, certainly not with the developments of certain technologies. but it's highly likely that we may kill ourselves before we realise any potential for getting rid of it. It may be something that's part of our evolutionary history, and something therefore to fight powerfully. In order to realise a better humanity, or go my route, which is transcend humanity altogether. Just forget it. Stop worshipping humanity. Stop worshipping the notion of our humanity, or think that there's something worthwhile in it, and look to transcending it by any means, technology, genetic manipulation, whatever. It doesn't matter. We need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of this self-destructive tribalism that leads us to kill our children. Which is what it is about in many respects. It is about the elderly killing and sacrificing children. And it's kind of despairing.
On that bombshell. I can't think of anything to add to that. I mean,
the only other thing, just very briefly, because I know it's late.
Absolutely.
I know you're probably tired. No. There was one thing. There is a tendency these days, I find, for King to come into for some stick for certain aspects of it. Yes. One of them is the reason that Pennywise wakes up in the 1980s, in what will be the modern era. Which it's a spark. He's waking up anyway, but it's sparked by the murder of a gamer,
Adrian Mellon. Yes,
that's right. Yeah, and yes. I've seen King come in for some stick about this quite a lot. And okay, to be fair, there is a tendency for King to write gay characters as though they are either victims or they're villains, and that's pretty much it. But you know what? Having reread that part recently. What I liked about it was that it really emphasises the sickness of the culture and of the era, because the two gay guys are just guys.
Yep.
They're just guys. There's nothing overt about them. There's nothing flamboyant about them. There's nothing like cartoon or exaggerated about them. They're just guys. Yeah. They're just out on a night out at a carnival. When it all kicks off, when it all happens. And if anything, the straight characters come off as way worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's
worse.
Interesting point, because that's what my abiding memory of that sequence is, that it's a love story where everyone not in the love story is just a complete arsehole, up to and including the investigating police officers.
Oh, they're cocks. Yeah, they're horrible. They're just foul. I mean, I think one of them actually says, "Oh, I don't like the faggots, but I don't like what you did to them."
It's like
almost like, wow.
There's a bit where they're because a beat cop intervenes, and if I remember rightly, it's the son of the beat cop from the 50s. It's the Irish O'Neill. It's his son, which is a lovely bit of parallel. That's one of the things that's very rich in the story, is the parallels between 85 and 55. But I think he says something like about the bum biters, I'm neutral. And he's talking to the guy who's going to go on to kill Adrian Mellon, but right now it's just this confrontation. It's Webby, isn't it? Webby Garton. And he says to Webby Garton, you what are you going to do about that faggot doing that, wearing that hat and being that? And he says, look, about the bum pinchers, I'm neutral, but you are messing up my fare. You're making the place look untidy. So and it's like that's what passes for tolerance in 85.
That's what passes for tolerance. Yeah, I mean, and it is harrowing. I mean, I think it probably. I mean, it's not something I harp on, but it is something that does. I think that kind of scene in literature or in cinema or whatnot has a particular resonance for gay men, because it is something that does happen.
Yeah, of course.
It's sadly something you have to think about, when you're out and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I read it, and it was bloody hard.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, it actually was hard to read. It's because it kind of sends all of those hackles go up. All of those similar situations come back.
Sure.
It's really well done. It's really well done, and from my perspective, I thought the gay characters were done really well.
Okay.
I really do. And I understand why King doesn't write gay characters much as well, and he's been very candid about this as well. He says because it's not my experience, because I don't know, I can't really. He feels as though he can't do it legitimately, which is fine.
Yeah, sure.
That's absolutely fine. That's perfectly fine by me, certainly.
I think my take on it, for what it's worth, is as with King, I'm a kind of straight, white, left-leaning person.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
there is an anxiety about it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, for me, whether it's writing about a gay character or writing a story with a person of color, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm in those circumstances as a writer, I am incredibly conscious of my whiteness and my straightness, and my, like, I'm very aware of the privilege that confers, and I'm very aware of the untested assumptions I might betray in attempting to realistically portray a character of color or a gay character or whatever, like,
it's hard, isn't it? I mean, it's
it is,
hard
and I think,
because,
I think it's an important anxiety. I think it's necessary to acknowledge that, because I think that if you don't, you're guaranteed that you're going to fuck it
that
up.
you're going to screw it up and write a cartoon character, essentially.
Exactly.
You're going to write a cartoon character, yeah. And, a lot do. A lot get it wrong. I mean, there is a tendency for, not to get on any kind of soapbox or anything like that, but there is a tendency for gay characters to be like hyper gay, that to be one stereotype or another.
Yep.
And it is frustrating. It is really irritating when you see those archetypes playing out again and again and again and again and again and again, because they tend to not be real. That's the thing.
Right.
They tend to be. They don't tend to be of anybody's actual experience. They're actually a cartoon that has been enshrined in popular culture, which has become the perception of truth. It's bizarre. It's truly strange. You see it in soaps. You see it in soaps all the time.
Yeah.
Those token characters that are just cartoon characters and that make me grit my teeth and want to chuck a shoe through the television screen.
I'm pleased to hear that this part of the book that you felt that it did resonate, because I think for me, one of the reasons I come back to King over and over, one of the reasons he's a ground zero artist for me, is because I really feel that whenever King is writing, even in his even in his bad work, even in the work that's not as strong, I feel that he is trying as hard as he can to portray something he perceives as being honest.
Oh yeah, I do too. I think there is an earnestness. I think that's part of its charm, to be honest. What I find with King is even the stuff that isn't very good is very readable.
Yeah.
It's never hard to read. It's like he is really trying. He is really, really trying, and he wants to get it right. He really, really wants to get it right. He wants you to like it. He wants you to enjoy yourself. He wants you to have some sort of resonance. Okay, he doesn't always hit the mark. But he hits hard when he does.
Yeah.
And it is such a good example of this because it's so readable. It's a book that's like a block. You could build houses out of it. You really could. But it feels like it's very not like The Lord of the Rings in this instance. The Lord of the Rings is 1,300 odd pages long in most editions, and it feels it.
It does, yeah.
Bloody feels it. You've read that book when you've read it. It sailed through it. Yeah. Sailed through. I remember sitting there because I read it on Kindle too. I did buy the new big edition with the the movie tie-in edition, but
sure,
I read it on Kindle, and I could sit down for a session of reading it, and suddenly 40 pages have gone, and suddenly 80 pages have gone, and suddenly 120 pages have gone, and suddenly you're maneuvering through this book, and you're not feeling it. You're not feeling like, by which I mean you're not feeling any weight. Yeah. It's not dragging you. It's not difficult to read. And I think that's just because of the way King writes. He writes colloquially. He writes like he's having a conversation with you. It feels really intimate. It feels like he's at a bar telling you the story and he's talking to you.
Yeah.
And I love that.
It really shouldn't be possible for a book that fucking long to feel that easy to read. Like, that should not be possible. Should it? I mean, it's absurd because I agree with you. I mean, I've read it, like, I'm definitely in double digits, comfortably in double digits with that book. And every time, one of the things that hits me is at a certain point, I'm just carried away by it. Every time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's it. It draws you in. The world is vivid. The world is colourful. The characters are dynamic, and you want to know.
Yeah.
You want to be with them. I mean, that's a great mark of any fiction for me. If you like the characters and you want to be with them, and you mourn the fact that you're not with them when the book closes, I think that's a real testament to an excellent bit of writing. It really is.
I think that's the key, and I think experientially for me, that's the thing about it, is that it doesn't just reconnect with my childhood, although it does, obviously, because of the age I first read it, but it also reconnects me with the ideal of childhood, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kind of touchdown, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a cipher.
It is. And I get to, you know, and it's like, you know, I get to go back to the Barons.
Yeah.
And I get to hang out with those amazing kids. I get to be one of the losers gang, and it's like, it's the coolest thing in the world.
It's cool. It is. Yeah. It is really cool. And I know, you know, there is this real snobbishness about King's work, and I see it a lot. It's about horror in general, but you really see it about King's work.
Yeah.
In literary circles, you really tend to see it, and I don't have any cotter with it. I really don't.
No.
I think he's very readable. He's very interesting. There are hidden depths. There really are, but you need to look for them. And it's just engaging. Yeah. It's an engaging bit of work. I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and it's one of those books that has kind of rekindled my love. I actually want to go and read more. I want to go and reread more King. I want to reread all my Barker books. I want to go and find new stuff now, you know? And you need that. I think as a reader you need it. I think as a writer you need it. God, you need it. You need something that's going to, like, refresh you somehow.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for it doing that. The film did that enormously for me, and I'm grateful to the book for doing it.
Well, that's cool. And I you know, obviously as someone who's a pretty uncritical fan of the book, especially, I'm really pleased to hear that the revisit, you know, was a pleasurable experience for you. That it stood up, because there's never any guarantees.
There aren't, no. There is every chance that you're going to hate it. There's every chance that it just isn't going to work anymore. I mean, I do it all the time. I go back to media of all sorts from my childhood, and it just doesn't stand up anymore. Doesn't stand up. I found a new resonance with it. It's actually become a very, very fun and significant adult book for me, which has pleased me immensely. I am going to go on now to read Desperation next, I think, and The Regulators after that. And a couple of others as well. I might read his whole back catalogue. Why not? You know.
Well, you know what? We may have to break format then, because if you Desperation's another touchstone book for me. So if you want to come back and talk Desperation again, I'll any excuse for me to reread that, frankly.
Oh, absolutely! I'd love to. Okay, I would absolutely love to come back and talk Desperation.
Well, maybe we'll do the Desperation Regulators, because they are twin, aren't they? So,
they're twin, definitely.
I haven't read Regulators in a long time, so that would be fun for me. Okay, cool. All right, man. Well, I think we got a podcast here.
I think we've done all right there. I think we've done rather well with that one. We've covered a lot of bases, I can tell you.
No, that's very cool. Thank you for coming and talking about it with me. Before we do go, if you could let the people listening know where else they can find you on the internet if they're interested in finding your work.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you can find my stuff at www.strangeplaygrounds.com, where you'll find fiction and articles and reviews and whatnot, and also links to my books if you ever want to read them. You can also find me at the Twitter account Enigmatic Elegy, where again you'll find these odd little snippets of story and whatnot. That's all I do with my Twitter account. I just post like these odd little 280, 140 character stories. And you can also find various videos at the YouTube channel Exaggerated Elegy.
And I thoroughly recommend you go and do all of those things immediately.
Thank you so much, man.
No, thank you. All right. Thanks very much for being on the very first episode of Kitting It. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Fabulous. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Stopping recording. So that's it. That's our show. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did making it. Kitting It will be returning on a bi-monthly basis on the Watching Robocop feed for the foreseeable future. I've got plenty of guests lined up who are interested in taking part. I'm very much hopeful that Robocop will stay monthly, but that's up to you. At the moment, Patreon backers are very generously supporting the show, but they're doing it at a level such that I can't afford to be broadcasting more than one show a month. So this will be running bi-monthly with Robocop for the foreseeable future. But once Patreon gets back above $20 a month, we will be offering Robocop on a monthly basis as before, with Kit and It running as bonus episodes on a bi-monthly basis. I'd love to do that. I'd love to get as many of these shows out to you as I can. So if that's something that interests you, please do head on over patreon.com/kitpower. Just $1 a month gets you 7-day early access to Robocop, gets you 7-day early access to Kit and It, often much more than 7 days, by the way. Often you'll get much, you'll get the material far in advance of official release. And on a weekly basis now, for $1 a month, you will get exclusive content from me of some kind, whether that's exclusive audio content, non-fiction work, fiction, extracts. There's all kinds of good stuff happening all the time. And obviously at high pledge levels, you get even more bonuses, such as every ebook I release as soon as I get it. Backers at $3 a month get to watch me write live every single week. They get to watch me sit for a couple of hours and produce brand new material. Again, often that is exclusive access many months ahead of any official release for that stuff. So it's well worth checking out. I just want to conclude by thanking again George Lea for coming back on the show and talking to me again. He's a wonderful guest, and I do recommend you go and check out his work. As I said, stay tuned for more Kit and It. And until next time, we all float down here.